this week it was revealed that Clive Palmer says he'll only pay a maximum of $200 million to creditors over his failed Queensland nickel business. I posted that story on my Facebook page and hundreds of you rightly shared your anger towards him and concern for the workers left devastated when his business went into administration. After spending $50-odd million in a failed bid to get himself elected to the Queensland Senate, you'd think Clive Palmer would have had some humility knocked into him, but it seems not. Even today, he failed to show up to court after trying to get his trial delayed yet again. Well, I thought it was about time for an update on the trial so that the truth has nowhere to hide. I'm joined now by the poor journalist who has to sit in the trial day in, day out, and he's from the Australian newspaper, Charlie Peel. Charlie's joining me now from Brisbane. As I said, this is, what, a 9-week or so trial, and you're the poor bugger who's got to front up every day, even when Clive's not there, and go through the detail of this pretty murky affair. Let's remind people what happened. Queensland Nickel went into administration. It was a company owned in part by Clive Palmer, but through a labyrinth of structures and effectively run, wasn't it, by his nephew, Clive Mensick, who's basically skipped the country and never been seen since. How much are the creditors owed, Charlie?
Well, there's about $300 million all up that creditors were owed when the company collapsed, and that's made up of various trade creditors as well as employees. And a big creditor is obviously the federal government, which stumped up $66 million to cover employee entitlements when the company collapsed. And so there's been a special purpose liquidator appointed, and they're working alongside general purpose liquidator, but the special purpose liquidator is specifically trying to recoup the taxpayer money that went out to cover those employee entitlements.
There's a barrister, Shane Doyle, who made some opening statements today, and he alleges that Mr Palmer made various payments with money from Queensland Nickel that didn't benefit the company, so that would be in breach of corporations law, I presume, there. Some of these payments look like they went, or allegedly went, to family members. Tell me more. Yeah,
so some of the payments, they're totalling millions of dollars. There was $8 million that went to Clive's, or Mr Palmer's father-in-law, who lives in Bulgaria. And then there's there's various payments, but there's another $1 million payment to a woman who lives in Kyrgyzstan. And the reasons given for that, well, allegedly she provided mining services, but liquidators who combed through the company's records were unable to find any salient reason for that money being spent. So there's a lot of questions, and when Mr Palmer's been grilled about this in public hearings previously, he's made comments that the money that went to his father-in-law was for natural love and affection and these sort of reasons. So he's never been able to give an adequate reason as to why the company's money was siphoned away and given to those people. But it's looking like that could be something that comes out over the next 9 weeks.
And why did he fail to show up in court today? What was the excuse?
So he's a self-represented litigant, essentially. So his companies are also defendants in this case, but they have their own legal team and barrister, and he's got a legal team behind him, and the other defendants have legal teams and barristers, but he's chosen to represent himself on the at the bar table. However, he apparently sent an email to the judge's associate and explained that he would come and go as he pleased throughout the trial. And so essentially, yesterday morning there was some administrative matters. The trial got underway, broke for lunch, and Mr Palmer hasn't been back in court since. So it's unknown which days he will be there, but that's up to him. And the trial won't be heard over the next 2 days due to some changes with expert witnesses, but it'll be underway again on Monday.
And Clive Mensick, who was the nephew of Clive Palmer, who was basically seen to be, or allegedly seen to be, running the company in the last few months of its operation at least, he left Australia pretty much as legal action started, or leading into legal action certainly. And every time it was queried where he was and subpoenas were put out for him to attend court, he was on a cruise ship, allegedly, going around the world months and months on end. Questions were asked who was paying for this luxury cruise and the living overseas. He has never come back to Australia, to my knowledge. It's not been reported that he has in any event. Was he discussed at all in proceedings?
He's come up a few times in his role as the director, and he was actually mentioned yesterday where the barrister, Mr. Doyle, described him as a fugitive who's wanted around Australia for not fronting up for those court appearances. It's certainly a good holiday if he's still on holiday, and he's been gone for close to 3 years now, and the chances of him coming back for the trial are very unlikely. And he's, as of the last time I checked with Mr. Palmer's media advisors, Mr. Mensick was still being paid, but now in his role with the Titanic II, so no longer just a payment continuing from his time with Queensland Nickel.
Okay, so he's still being paid by entities associated with Clive Palmer, but just in his, yes, well, yeah. I'll live and breathe. I tell you what, I don't think we'll ever see the Titanic II ever come to fruition. And I think, you know, this is where the common sense of voters come through. Yes, he threw a lot of money at the election campaign, but clearly I think people understood what was going on and this litigation pending, the treatment of employees, the money outstanding, the creditors, and it's not the big creditors where I think the real ramifications are. It's all the associated small businesses and contractors affected when Queensland Nickel went under, in and around the very same electorates that he was hoping would elect him back in the parliament. You're a Queenslander. How good's his name up there?
Yeah, well, actually, I worked in Townsville, at the Townsville Bulletin at the time that the refinery collapsed, and I can tell you at the time up there was a lot of people very angry, very concerned about their futures. 800 workers, or about 800 workers, lost their jobs, and then the ongoing ramifications for the economy in that region, losing such a massive employer. From my recollection, it was the largest employer in Townsville aside from the council. So it's a huge, or the government's included, but it's a huge blow for the economy up there. And Mr. Palmer came out during the election, obviously, and promised that he would stump up the rest of the entitlements that weren't covered under the federal government's entitlements guarantee scheme.
That's right. And
he, possibly in a move to win back some support in that region, and I think it worked to some extent, but his candidate, Greg Dowling, a former rugby league star, really didn't get too much support during the election, but certainly a lot more than the Martin Brewster, Clive's candidate in 2016 got, which, you know, straight after the company collapsed. But there is still a lot of anger, and some of those people have been paid out after Mr. Palmer made that new
the trust payment, yes.
Committed to paying. And
yeah, I'll be interested.
So
I'll follow that up myself too. I'll follow that up, Charlie, because I'd be surprised if people are really going to get their money, at least a large block of people. I think he probably made some payments prior to the election, as much as marketing purposes as anything else. But I'll be interested now that he did not get the Senate seat, whether people are actually seeing their money. I'll follow that up. But you enjoy your time for the next 9 weeks sitting in court listening to Clive Palmer. You're a bigger man than me to do all of that, and I will read your reports in The Australian with interest. Charlie Peel, thanks very much for your time tonight.